Thank you, everybody, for taking the time to sit down with us today. Sincerely appreciate the USI team, all the support, and kind of getting the message out there. My name's Nick Porter. I probably know a lot of you, or have met a lot of you. I consider everybody at USI across the entire country good friends. I am the president and CEO of Premier Workforce Solutions. And we do just that. We bring solutions primarily to the HR space. We, in a lot of cases, bring business to USI. And we think that you do things better than anybody else in the country. And so I'm a big believer in everybody on this call. Kevin Scroggins reached out to me a couple of weeks ago. One of our clients at Premier that we do a lot of work with 2 years ago had a need for testing, tracking, the full kind of workup. It's a big long-term care, post-acute type company in the nursing home industry. And believe it or not, nursing homes have been required to test and report to 7 or 8 different federal agencies on a weekly basis for the last 18 months. Test every employee, every resident, once a week, twice a week, once every other week, various forms of testing as mandated by the state and federal government. And so Premier began reaching out and seeking support from a partner who could provide those services to our client. We, at that time, stumbled onto what has become an amazing partnership with a company called BASE10. And I've got Rob Holton on the phone, and I'll introduce him in a second. He's going to walk through the presentation. But long story short, when the new kind of mandate dropped on us a couple of weeks ago, initially I kind of wondered, okay, how is this going to impact every other employer in the country? And I think that we are all kind of asking that same question, which is about the same time Kevin Scroggins reached out and said, hey, don't you have a solution for this? So again, BASE10, they've been doing this for a couple of years. They do it for tens of thousands of employees every single week today. And they provide genuinely a best-in-class solution for vaccine and testing tracking, along with the ultimate delivery of the test. So with that being said, I will get out of the way. Again, thank everybody so much for the time today, and I will hand it over to my good friend Rob. So, Rob, there you go.
Thanks, Nick. I appreciate it. Great intro. So I appreciate everybody taking the time to get on the call today. As Nick said, I'm Rob Holton, co-founder and COO of BASE10. Also on the call with me to help answer questions after the presentation, I have my co-founder and CEO, Dr. Michael Fang, and we also have Dr. Phil Jacobson, who is our senior medical director as well, who will help answer questions. Just a couple of things. As much as I would love to make this an interactive presentation, with the 100+ people, I can't really do that. So I would encourage everybody, as you get questions during this presentation, just hit on the chat button in Zoom, type in your questions, and my team will stay on the phone as long as we can to answer as many questions as you have. So do not hesitate to fire off questions, and we'll get to them after the presentation. For those that don't know BASE10, we are a precision medicine company focused on infectious disease, chronic disease management. Our differentiating factor really is a very unique combination of technology and human health services. On the other hand, combining those two, we found early on when you're dealing with very dynamic disease states, whether it's whether it's diabetes, whether it's cancer, whether it is COVID-19, a technology solution by itself or a human services solution by itself doesn't really get us where we need to be. If you can combine those two, you can generate tremendous results, as we've proven, and as Nick had mentioned, in the COVID space. Since the beginning of this pandemic, BASE10 has been managing from an end-to-end solution, not just testing and reporting and compliance, but tracking as well, both at the clinical side and at the employee side, for hundreds of nursing homes and companies across the country. So our model is proven out, our product is absolutely proven. So that's just kind of a little bit of background on BASE10. So let's kind of just jump into why we're all here. The mandate. I figured since this would be the best place to start as anything, which is what do we know? And unfortunately, it's not a lot. This is the smallest slide I've got in the presentation. Once the mandate was issued, all we know right now is that for employers that have over 100 employees, they're going to be required to report on their vaccination status. And those that are not fully vaccinated will have to test every week prior to going into the office. This will be administered by OSHA. We are awaiting OSHA and their ETS right now to see what is going to be all of the factors that we don't know. One of the things that we do know is that the proposed penalties will be up to $14,000 per infraction. And unfortunately, that's about what we do know. So let's kind of take a step back and say, well, what don't we know? This is important. These are uncertainties that we're looking for the OSHA ETS to be able to give us a lot more guidance in how do we develop that solution. One of the things that we don't know is what types of tests are going to be permitted. Right? Is it going to be PCR only? PCR is a laboratory test. It has the highest accuracy, sensitivity, and specificity in terms of testing for COVID. It's a laboratory test. Or are we going to be able to do, will OSHA allow antigen tests? If so, there's two types of antigen tests. There's point of care, there's self-administered. Which ones are going to be permitted? How are those tests going to be administered? Do they have to be administered by a clinician, right? With point of care antigen testing, we already know if they allow it, it's going to have to be clinician administered. What about the self-administered POs or the self-administered antigen tests? How are we going to verify or validate those test results? Right? These are all questions that have to be answered in the ETS. What is the effective date? How are employees counted? Is it just full-time employees? What about part-time employees, contract workers? What about vendors that come in on site? What about work from home employees? Right? How do we count all of these? What is enforcement going to look like? We know that OSHA is managing it. Will they be the ones that we're reporting to? Are they the ones that will be levying the fines? What does enforcement look like? Who will be responsible for those test results to report? Same thing with the vaccination status. Who are we reporting to those to? Is it the CDC, OSHA, so on and so forth? We just don't know what those reporting requirements are going to be. Then another one is, what are the obligations of the company for positive test results? Because we are going to have positive test results, especially with the Delta variant. So with all of this testing, is it the company's responsibility to notify the CDC? What does that look like? So these are things that we don't know, that we know will be addressed with the coming ETS from OSHA in the coming weeks. But there's other things that we need to understand in addition to that. First and foremost, the regulations and the guidelines, whether they're CDC, federal, state, local, OSHA, they change frequently, right? In terms of what our experience in the long-term care facility, those CDC guidelines can change weekly. And they're not just small changes, right? Some of these are fundamental changes to the requirements and to the programs. So when we're looking at trying to come up with a solution, right, one of the key things is that solution needs to be robust, but it needs to be nimble so that it can handle all of these changes. Additionally, states can adopt more restrictive requirements than the OSHA ETSs if they so choose, which means especially for companies that have facilities in multiple states, you could have different regulations state by state by state by state. So whatever the solution is, has to be able to handle those reporting requirements and also dealing with those different changes and those different guidelines at a state level. Other things that we need to look at, right? Booster shots, variant-specific vaccinations. We know Moderna is already working on variant-specific vaccinations. Does that become part of the definition of fully vaccinated? What about the booster shots? Right now, it's pretty clear. The general consensus is they won't make a booster shot the mandated part of fully vaccination across the board. That can change. But what we already are seeing in terms of booster shots are CDC guidelines based upon a patient's health status. Are they immunocompromised? Are they at risk? Are they high risk? Are they elderly? Then those recommendations for that booster shot does come in. So whatever this solution is, right? We need to be able to track these different types of variants, and the definition of fully vaccinated. And if there's nothing else that you can take away from this presentation, I would be this, that the definition of fully vaccinated individual is not static. It's not binary. It is absolutely not a yes or a no question. Right? There's not vaccinated, there's fully vaccinated, partially vaccinated. But what about, we have our first shot taken, but it's been 6 months until they do the second shot. Are they within the guidelines for that second shot to be considered fully vaccinated? If the booster status comes in for those that are immunocompromised, right? Employee could be vaccinated, but then they could fall into unvaccinated if they have to be able to take that booster shot. So this is a very dynamic procedure to be able to track the vaccination status. So again, nothing else, take that away. This definition of vaccination is a moving target and needs to be tracked. Other things we need to think about, symptom tracking. If the OSHA does allow for antigen tests to be used for the testing requirement, the one thing we know about the antigen test, and we've done this in nursing homes and the LTC community, is that antigen testing is not as accurate as a PCR test. And one of the ways that we put guide rails on those antigen tests is through symptoms. So that if you have COVID symptoms, but you have a negative antigen test, the regulations require us to run a confirming PCR test and send it to the laboratory. Conversely, if you're asymptomatic, but your antigen test is positive, the regulations require you to run a confirming PCR test at a laboratory. So whatever solution we have to be able to track symptoms. And we also have to be able to move between different types of tests to satisfy those regulations. The other thing to kind of keep in mind is, do we need to track medical records? Does the solution have a HIPAA compliant platform to be able to track, employee medical records, especially for the booster? Are they immunocompromised, right? Are they high risk? So that we can notify them that we've got to get the booster done in time to keep them fully vaccinated. So these are things that we have to definitely keep in mind that we hope that will be addressed in this first round of the ETS from OSHA. And if not, will probably be addressed at some point shortly thereafter. One last thing on OSHA is that OSHA only has jurisdiction in 29 states. In the remaining states, such as California and North Carolina, they actually have their own federally approved workplace safety agencies, and they will have 30 days to adopt equivalent measures as whatever the OSHA ETS is. And again, those measures can be more strict or stringent than what OSHA puts out. But this definitely creates the scenario where you could have differing requirements from state to state to state. And again, the solution must incorporate that. And then finally with OSHA, the ETS is going to be in force for 6 months. After that, it will have to be replaced by a permanent measure. And in our experience, that first 6 months, as they're kind of figuring this out, is going to be a very chaotic situation. That's where you're going to see a lot of the changes in the regulations and the guidelines as they're kind of figuring it out as they go along. And whatever solution you go with, you definitely have to make sure that it is nimble and robust enough to be able to handle whatever those changes are in virtually real time. So what does that ultimate solution look like? It's going to have to be comprehensive. It's going to have to be a flexible solution that integrates that dynamic vaccine tracking that we've talked about, and then the automated weekly testing that drives off of that vaccine tracking. And then again, be nimble enough to be able to support and handle those frequent changes that we're going to see. And that's really what BASE10 has put together. We have put together a very comprehensive end-to-end solution that's dealing with not just employee vaccine tracking, but creating the vaccine tracking for the corporate client as well. It's two very different components. BASE10's solution handles all of the testing. We provide the supplies, the administration, the CLIA labs, and then all of the result tracking, pushing them back into our system. It is a truly comprehensive platform, and our testing is driven by a set of sophisticated algorithms that are running against the vaccine tracking that we have. So that as employees move in and out of that or change vaccination status, in real time, it updates our testing program and protocols to determine who do we have to test every single week. And we do that in real time. More importantly than that is this platform is very customizable. The solution that you're going to bring to an employer that has 100 employees in a high-rise business office is going to be very different than the solution to the company that is a 5,000 person manufacturing plant that has a 100-acre facility, right? That we can go and put plenty of space for on-site testing. So whatever the solution has to be, it has to be able to customize between the small and the large, which is exactly what BASE10 does, and we do everything in between. And then the final piece of the BASE10 program is our support. And I cannot emphasize how important this support component is. For BASE10, we provide the clinical and non-clinical support, not only for the employees, but also for the leadership. Every one of these tests has to have a prescription written by a physician. BASE10 does that. When there is a positive test result, there has to be follow-up with that employee, notifying them of the test result. What are the next steps? Quarantine, isolation, so on and so forth. What is the return to work protocols? And then we have the non-clinical support for the client, because all of that information needs to be relayed to the company in real time. Hey, these are the people that aren't going to be out of work. They're positive. Here's their recovery protocol. Here's when we can expect them back to work. But more importantly, what is going on at your facility by facility specific? Are we seeing a surge in positive rates, in infection rates? What can we do about that? That type of support is absolutely critical for as dynamic as this virus is and the regulations behind it. It is an absolute critical component of what we offer. So how do we do it? So the vaccine tracking starts with an employee-facing app. This is an app that we have had and been running with for almost 2 years now. This app can not only handles the symptom surveys that would be required for an antigen test for the employee, but is also the primary vehicle for the employee for us to be able to track their vaccination status and their vaccine records. We understood that we have to create a process that is as low a lift and not cumbersome for an employee as possible. So what we've done in our app, when an employee goes to get a vaccine dose, all they're required to do within our app, drop down list, type in a few things. They just have to put in where they get it, where are they getting the vaccine, who is the manufacturer, and what is the date. After that, all they have to do is use our app to take a picture of their vaccine card. We have an entire business analytics department. We will put eyes on every single vaccine card, review it, and then transcribe that information, the manufacturer, the lot number, the date, all into that vaccine record. And those dates are important because this is we set up the real-time monitoring for the employee, notification, the window is open for your second shot. You need to get your second shot now. There's booster eligibility, right? All of that. We are constantly working in front of the employee to ensure that they finish and complete that path to fully vaccinated status. On the backside of that, we provide all of the reporting that's required back to the company so that they can track what is the vaccine status of their employees, how many are vaccinated, how many are unvaccinated. We do all of the reporting that's going to be associated with that on behalf of the company. So the second part of that is going to be the testing. And again, we handle the entire testing regimen for the employer. It is integrated with our vaccine tracking program in real time, so we know exactly who needs to be tested and when, and how do we generate that negative test result for them to be able to go back into work that week. So there's two primary testing options right now. First is PCR, which we discussed, laboratory test. We use saliva kits for that. We can do it on site or we can do it at home. Either way, it goes to our CLIA labs. We have results within 48 hours. Those results are all digital. It gets pushed back to the employee's app. We also notify the company of the test result, and that allows them to go back to work that week. The other options, which we don't have a lot of clarity on right now until OSHA gives us the final standards, but is going to be the rapid antigen test. There's two types of rapid antigen tests. One is the point of care antigen test, which has to be administered by clinicians. So we would be able to do that on site with the BASE10 clinicians, where we would administer the rapid antigen test. Results would be available in 15 minutes or less. To put a point on that, because it's clinician administered on site, that is not necessarily going to be a cost. There's not going to be a cost savings from a PCR test, because that is clinician driven. The second one is the self-administered rapid antigen test. And again, we have to wait on OSHA to give clarification if they're going to allow self-administered antigen tests. And if so, how do we go about validating and generating the test result on a self-administered test? When you look in the industry, the closest thing we can find is actually the airline industry and how they handle self-administered antigen tests. So in order to use self-administered antigen tests to come into the United States, that self-administered test has to be done concurrent with a telemedicine visit, where a healthcare professional will advise you on how to use the self-administered swab and stay online for the 15 minutes until the test result is complete, and then will generate that validated test result. So that's the rapid antigen. Now, if that is approved, that will be a cheaper alternative to PCR. But again, we can't get any more specific on that until we see the OSHA regulations. Now, as we talked about before, an important component of this is going to be, you are going to have positive test results. But what do we do with that? And this is really the cornerstone of what BASE10 does, right? As I mentioned, we have the clinical support so that we can do the outreach to do next steps for the positive patient, quarantine, isolation, answer the questions that are required. But we're also reporting it to the company. And these types of actionable insights can really drive change in the company. If we can look at infection rates at a facility by facility basis, we can get on top of spread. If we start to see an uptake in infection at any one facility, our dashboards, our data, and our clinical insights that we're providing back to the company can allow them to look at, hey, do we need to change our social distancing requirements, our masking requirements? Do we need to look at maybe only having critical people at work, remote work, everybody else, so on and so forth. Our ability to do this in real time, we know historically through the nursing homes, has a tremendous impact on bending that curve and as far as future infection. Hours matter. The quicker we can get them out and change those protocols, the slower we can create that spread for the infection. So while our platform handles very effectively the dynamic vaccine tracking, the testing, the reporting, and everything else, we're also handling how do we deal with this horrible pandemic? And how do we deal with it at the office and at work? And so that's really one of the cornerstones of the BASE10 platform. So in addition to that, we can track, as we mentioned, who's vaccinated, how many are vaccinated, who's partially vaccinated, how many positive results do you have broken down by facility, right? What are your compliance metrics? How many breakthrough infections do you have from your vaccinated employees, right? What are your overall positive test results? We can provide all of that data, right? But because at our heart, we are a data analytics platform as well, we are able to create these incredibly customized reports, because all the data in the world means nothing if we can't put them in front of you in a consumable, actionable way. And that's one of the things that BASE10 is best at, is what we'll work with all the companies and generate actionable and insightful reports so that they can get ahead of this curve. So obviously we feel like we have an incredibly powerful solution that's end-to-end. Testing, supplies, vaccine tracking, reporting, right? Compliance. But why would you choose BASE10? And the reality is BASE10 has a proven track record of success, and we've excelled in the most heavily regulated industry, the long-term care industry, for the past 18 months. We manage COVID solutions for hundreds of nursing homes and companies across the country. And that includes the clinical, the regulatory compliance, the testing, the vaccine tracking, the reporting, the supplies. We've been doing it since the beginning of the pandemic. We've reported and tracked over 14 million points of data with over 500,000 tests. And we've been tracking and reporting vaccinations for long-term care communities since January of 2021. Nobody's done it longer than we have. And most importantly, or equally importantly, we have our own in-house logistics and fulfillment center, which ensures that we have the testing supplies that are required. This is an important piece, especially for these corporations. Regardless of the peak of the pandemic, the highs and lows, we've all heard about the shortages of supplies, testing supplies. Since the beginning of this pandemic, not one of our facilities, not one of our companies, not one of our patients has ever missed a COVID test because of lack of supplies. We've in-housed it, we get them directly from the manufacturer, and we ensure that supply is there. For companies, that's critical. We're gonna see a run on testing supplies. We're talking about 30% of 80 million people that are gonna have to start testing on a routine basis weekly. That is gonna put a dent in our supply. If they don't have that test, regardless of whether the supplies are there or not, they don't have that negative test result, they can't return to work. Or the company has to go at risk and possibly look at a $14,000 violation per incident. So BASE10 will take care of all of that. Since the beginning of this pandemic, BASE10, we've managed all of the regulatory requirements that have been imposed on the front line with tremendous success. The reality is the OSHA guidelines will most likely be a subset of the more stringent CDC guidelines in the LTC world, which we've been operating under since the beginning of this pandemic. And they are actually the cornerstone of our compliance and the success of our platform. We successfully adapt to the frequent and weekly changes that the CDC administers, and we know OSHA is going to be the same way. Kind of my closing argument, I would say, for BASE10 is that the more uncertain and the dynamic regulations that exist, it's the stronger case to be made for BASE10, because this is what we do best. We can iterate and we can deal with whatever regulations come in place, and at the same time ensure that the patients and employees will always be tested, you'll be compliant, and we strive to be able to bend the curve on the infections on site. And that's really BASE10 in a nutshell. We included just kind of a snippet of some of the partners that we're working with currently. Everything from Providence to Bluebird Manufacturing, Signature Healthcare, the Florida Healthcare Association, Gulf Coast, ELAP Services. So this is just a small sampling of all of the groups that we work with. Again, this is a proven product for us. There's nothing new that OSHA can bring that we're not already doing. So it's something that we are excited about. And we look forward to hopefully talking with you all, more in detail in the future and see if we can be of any help for your clients.